Admiral Kraith of the Krell Empire stood in the command center of his flagship, staring at the holographic screen in front of him. He had watched the same message 3 times now, and each time it made him more certain that the humans were bluffing. On the screen a human man appeared. He looked to be in his 40s, maybe 50s. He wore a plain dark suit, the kind you might see at a boring office meeting. No fancy military uniform with medals. No weapons strapped to his belt. Nothing that screamed power or authority. Just a tired-looking man in a cheap suit. "This is Director James Mitchell of Earth's Outer Defense Commission," the man said. His voice was flat, almost bored. "For the last 14 months, Krell forces have raided 7 human colony worlds. We have filed diplomatic protests. We have offered negotiations. We have asked you to stop." Mitchell's face didn't move. No anger. No fear. Nothing. He just stared into the camera like he was reading a grocery list. "This is your final warning. We have established a boundary line at coordinates transmitted with this message. Cross it and there will be consequences. Not threats. Not promises. Consequences." The screen went black. Kraith stood there for a moment, then let out a long breath through his breathing slits. Behind him, his second-in-command, Officer Velkson, made a clicking sound with his mandibles. It was the Krell equivalent of a laugh. "Sir," Velkson said, walking up to stand beside the Admiral, "our intelligence reports are clear. The human defensive fleet consists of exactly 42 cruisers. Most of them are older models, barely kept running with spare parts and prayers. Our battle group alone has 300 warships. 300. Against 42. Kraith nodded slowly, pulling up the tactical display. The star chart appeared in the air between them, showing the human solar system and the surrounding space. A glowing red line formed a sphere around it, marking the boundary the humans had warned them about. It sat 2 light years out from their home planet. "Look at this," Kraith said, gesturing at the red line. "They draw a line in space and tell us not to cross it. Like children drawing a circle in the dirt around their toys." Velkson clicked again. "Humans are excellent at making dramatic speeches, sir. They love their grand gestures and their bold words. But when it comes to actual war, they have nothing. 42 ships. That's barely enough to defend a single planet, let alone an entire boundary zone this size." Kraith had done his research. He had studied human military history going back 200 years, ever since they first left their home planet and joined the wider galactic community. The humans talked big. They made impressive threats. They sent strongly worded diplomatic messages. But when push came to shove, they usually backed down. They preferred negotiation over combat. They avoided conflict whenever possible. That was what Kraith was counting on. Their mining operations in the Ceres Belt produce 70% of their raw materials, Kraith said, highlighting a section of the map. Metals, rare earth elements, everything they need to keep their colonies running. If we hit them there, we cripple their entire economy. He turned to face the gathered fleet commanders who had assembled in the command center. There were 15 of them, each commanding a squadron of ships. They represented the finest military minds in the Krell Empire. "We crossed the line in 6 hours, Kraith announced. "Primary target is the Ceres mining belt. Strip it clean. Take everything that isn't bolted down, and if it is bolted down, rip the bolts out and take those too." The commanders nodded in agreement. Not one of them raised an objection. Not one of them suggested caution. Why would they? The Krell Empire had been raiding human colonies for over a year now. Small outposts on the edge of human space. Mining stations. Research facilities. Places that were lightly defended or not defended at all. The humans had complained. They had filed official protests with the Galactic Council. They had sent diplomatic envoys who made long speeches about sovereignty and international law. But they had never fought back. Not once. So when Director Mitchell appeared on screen in his cheap suit, with his tired eyes and his monotone voice, delivering what he called a final warning, it just seemed like more of the same. More talk. More empty threats. More human theater. Kraith dismissed his commanders and returned to his private quarters. He pulled up the intelligence files on Earth one more time just to be sure. Just to check that he hadn't missed anything. The files were clear. Earth's military consisted of those 42 cruisers, plus maybe 100 smaller patrol ships scattered across their colony worlds. They had no known superweapons. No planet-killer devices. No secret fleets hidden in deep space. Their technology was average at best, maybe even a bit behind the galactic standard. They were, by all measurable metrics, weak. Kraith closed the files and prepared for the operation. In 6 hours his fleet would cross that red line. They would raid the Ceres Belt, take everything of value, and the humans would file another protest that nobody would care about. Would be easy. Outside his window, the Krell fleet hung in the darkness of space. 280 warships, each one bristling with weapons and shields. The largest military force the Krell Empire had assembled in 50 years. Against 42 outdated human cruisers. Kraith smiled. This wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be a harvesting operation. Earth had given them a warning. They chose to ignore it. Captain Thex sat in the command chair of his destroyer, watching the countdown clock tick down on the main screen. His ship was part of the Vanguard, the first wave. 12 heavy destroyers, the strongest and fastest ships in the fleet, chosen to lead the crossing into human territory. Crossing the human red line in 10 seconds, his navigator called out from her station. Thex gripped the armrest of his chair and kept his eyes locked on the display. The red boundary line appeared on the tactical map as a thin glowing sphere around the human solar system. His ship was seconds away from passing through it. 9 seconds. 8 seconds. 7. Around him, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. The weapons officer had all gun batteries charged and ready. The shield operator had defensive screens at maximum power. The communications officer monitored all frequencies for any sign of human military activity. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The ship crossed the line. Nothing happened. Thex let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He waited another 5 seconds, then another 10. Still nothing. No alarms. No explosions. No sudden appearance of human warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Status report, Thex ordered, his voice steady. The sensor officer checked his screens, ran a quick diagnostic, then looked up. All systems normal, sir. Ship integrity at 100%. Shields holding steady. No damage of any kind. What about enemy contacts? Running a full sweep now, sir. The officer's claws danced across his console, pulling data from every sensor array mounted on the hull. Scan complete. No human vessels detected within sensor range. No weapons platforms. No defense satellites. No mines. Nothing but empty space and distant stars. Thex felt the tension drain from his shoulders. The humans had been bluffing. Just like Admiral Kraith had predicted. They drew their little line in space, made their dramatic speech, and hoped it would be enough to scare off the Krell fleet. But it wasn't. It was just empty words backed by nothing. They were bluffing, Thex said loud enough for the bridge crew to hear. A few of them made clicking sounds of amusement. Continue to. The ship lurched hard to the left. Thex was thrown against the side of his command chair, his safety harness the only thing keeping him from being tossed across the bridge. Alarm klaxons began wailing. Red emergency lights flashed on every console. Sir. The navigator's voice was sharp with panic. Gravity fluctuation. Source unknown. Thex pulled himself upright and stared at the main display. The smooth lines of normal space had turned jagged and chaotic. Explain that. What's causing it? I don't know, sir. The gravitational field around us is going crazy. It's like something massive just appeared nearby, but I'm not reading any objects large enough to cause this kind of distortion. The ship lurched again, this time upward. Thex heard something crack in the hull, a sound that should never happen on a Krell destroyer. These ships were built to withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. They didn't just crack from gravitational stress. Sensors. Thex shouted. What's out there? The sensor officer was frantically working his console, pulling up screen after screen of data. His face had gone pale, which for a Krell meant his skin had shifted from dark green to a sickly yellow color. Sir, I'm detecting structural anomalies in space itself. They're not objects. They're not ships or stations or anything solid. They're geometries. What does that mean? Thex demanded. I don't know how to explain it, sir. Space is folding. The fabric of reality is bending in ways it shouldn't be able to bend. Something massive is emerging from. The officer trailed off, staring at his screen in disbelief. From where? I don't know where, sir. It's not coming from normal space. It's not dropping out of faster than light. It's just unfolding. Like it was always there but folded up so small we couldn't see it. Thex looked at the main view screen. At first he saw nothing but the normal starfield. Then, slowly, something began to change. In the distance, maybe a few 100,000 kilometers away, the stars started to bend. Not like they were being blocked by something solid. More like the light itself was being twisted and curved around something invisible. Then the structures appeared. They didn't fly in from somewhere else. They didn't materialize out of thin air. They unfolded. like watching someone open up a piece of paper that had been folded 1,000 times into something impossibly small. Except this paper was made of metal and energy and existed in more dimensions than Thex's eyes could properly process. The structures were enormous. Each one was easily the size of a small moon. They had shapes that hurt to look at, angles that didn't make sense, surfaces that seemed to exist in multiple places at the same time. Thex's brain tried to understand what he was seeing and failed. The structures were there, solid and real, but they also weren't quite there. They flickered in and out of normal space like they couldn't decide whether to fully exist or not. And there were dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. They surrounded the Krell vanguard in a loose sphere, spread out across thousands of kilometers of space. The navigator's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sir, those things. They've been here the whole time, haven't they?" Thex understood what she meant. These structures hadn't just been built. They hadn't been moved into position today or yesterday. They had been here for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. Hidden somehow. Folded away into whatever impossible dimensional space they occupied. Waiting. Just waiting for someone to cross the line. "Contact Admiral Kraith," Thex said quietly, his voice completely calm despite the cold fear spreading through his chest. "Tell him we have a problem." Admiral Kraith was reviewing fleet positions when the priority transmission came through from Captain Thex. The message took 4 minutes to reach him across the distance between the Vanguard and the main fleet. 4 minutes that felt like nothing until he heard what Thex had to say. "Admiral, this is Vanguard Command. We have a situation. Multiple situations. All 12 ships are experiencing severe system failures." Kraith's communications officer put the message on the main speakers so everyone on the bridge could hear. The usual calm efficiency of the bridge disappeared instantly. Officers stopped what they were doing and turned to listen. "Propulsion systems are destabilizing across the entire Vanguard," Thex continued, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We're reading critical hull stress on 7 ships. 'Cause unknown. We're surrounded by some kind of structures. They appeared out of nowhere. They're doing something to space itself. Requesting immediate support and..." The transmission cut off into static, then came back. "Losing sensor coherence. The ships are falling apart and we don't know why. We need to pull back now." Kraith pulled up the tactical display, zooming in on the Vanguard's position. The 12 ships showed up as red icons on the screen, clustered together in what the computer labeled as a spatial anomaly zone. Their status readings were all over the place. Engine output dropping. Shield strength fluctuating wildly. Hull integrity warnings flashing on half of them. "Get me a visual," Kraith ordered. The main view screen switched to a long-range camera feed from one of the Vanguard destroyers. What Kraith saw made no sense. The Krell ships were surrounded by massive geometric structures that seemed to phase in and out of reality. They weren't solid objects. They were more like tears in space. Wounds in the fabric of the universe itself. "Pull them back," Kraith said immediately. "Full retreat. Get those ships out of there now." His tactical officer worked frantically at his console, sending the retreat order. But seconds later, he looked up with confusion on his face. "Sir, they're trying to comply. All 12 ships have engaged reverse thrust. But they're not moving." "What do you mean they're not moving?" "They're burning fuel, sir. Engines are firing at maximum output. But according to their navigational sensors, they haven't moved a single meter. It's like they're locked in place." Kraith leaned forward, gripping the edge of his command console. "That's impossible. Nothing can hold a ship in place without some kind of tractor beam or gravity anchor, and our sensors would detect that." "Our sensors aren't detecting anything, sir. That's the problem. Space in that region isn't behaving normally. The Vanguard crossed the human boundary line and now they can't cross back." Before Kraith could respond, a new voice came through the bridge communications system. It wasn't Krell. It was human, female, and disturbingly calm. "Krell forces, this is Commander Rebecca Stone of Earth Defense. You were warned. The line you crossed wasn't a border. It was a threshold. One way." Every eye on the bridge turned to the communication station. The officer there was frantically checking his systems, trying to figure out how a human transmission had cut through their military-grade encrypted channels. Kraith straightened up, forcing authority into his voice. "This is Admiral Kraith of the Krell Empire. Under galactic law you cannot..." "You violated our space," Stone interrupted, her voice still perfectly calm. 14 months of raids on our colonies. 17,000 human colonists killed. Men, women, children. We filed diplomatic protests. We offered negotiations. We asked you to stop. You didn't. So we stopped asking. Kraith felt something cold slide down his spine. The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like she was reading a weather report. No anger. No threats. Just simple statements of fact. Commander Stone, whatever you're doing to our ships, cease immediately. This is an act of war. No, Admiral. This is a response to your act of war. You started this 14 months ago. We're ending it now. On the main view screen, something horrible began to happen to the Vanguard ships. The first destroyer started to come apart, but not from any explosion or weapons fire. Its hull plating began to age. Rust spread across the metal surface like a fast-forwarding video. Decades of decay happening in seconds. The ship's structure buckled and twisted as the metal weakened and failed. Sir. The sensor officer's voice cracked. I'm reading temporal distortions around the Vanguard. Time is moving differently inside that zone. For every second that passes for us, hours are passing for them. Another ship started to break apart. This one's fusion reactor went critical, but instead of exploding outward, it collapsed inward. The entire core compressed down into a point of infinite density, creating a miniature black hole that swallowed the ship from the inside out. Kraith watched in horror as a third ship simply stopped existing. One moment it was there on sensors, solid and real. The next moment the space where it had been was empty. Not destroyed. Not moved somewhere else. Just gone. Erased from reality like someone had hit a delete button. All ships, Kraith said, his voice barely above a whisper. Full retreat. Everyone back. Now. The main fleet began to turn, engines roaring to life as they prepared to run. But Stone's voice came through again, still calm, still unbothered. Retreat authorized, Admiral. You'll find the exit behind you back the way you came. 87 of your ships will make it out. The rest won't. Some of them are already too close to the threshold. Some of them crossed the line fully. They're not coming back. You can't do this, Kraith said, but even he could hear the defeat in his own voice. We didn't do this, Admiral. You did. You chose this when you crossed the line. We built these defenses 200 years ago, right after we first met other species in space. We built them and we hid them and we hoped we'd never have to use them. We hoped everyone would respect our boundaries. But you didn't. So here we are. On the view screen, more Vanguard ships were dying in ways that violated every law of physics Kraith understood. Crews were being torn apart at the molecular level. Ships were aging thousands of years in minutes. Reality itself was rejecting them, pushing them out of existence. We gave you 14 months to stop, Stone continued. 14 months of warnings. We gave you one final chance to turn around. You ignored all of it. So now you get to see what happens when humans stop being nice. The transmission ended with a soft click. Kraith stood frozen, watching his Vanguard die. The main fleet was already running, engines burning at maximum as they raced back toward the boundary line. Ships scattered in every direction, desperate to escape before whatever was killing the Vanguard reached them too. Out of 280 warships that had crossed into human space, only 87 made it back out. The rest simply ceased to exist. The Galactic Council chamber was a massive circular room carved from white stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Representatives from 47 different species sat in tiered rows, all facing the center where speakers could address the assembly. The room could hold heated debates between dozens of counselors all shouting at once. But today, as the Krell delegation finished their report, you could have heard a pin drop. Counselor Vree of the Thalan Union was the first to break the silence. He was an old diplomat, someone who had seen 3 wars and helped negotiate peace in all of them. His voice was careful, measured, like he was trying to make sure he understood correctly. Let me make certain I understand what you're telling us. The humans didn't use warships. They didn't use missiles or energy weapons or any conventional military force. Captain Thex stood at the speaker's podium in the center of the chamber. He was the highest-ranking Krell officer to survive the disaster. Out of 280 ships, his destroyer had been one of the 87 that made it back. He still had nightmares about watching the other ships die. That's correct, Counselor, Thex said. They weaponized space itself. Those structures we encountered, the ones that tore our ships apart, they weren't ships or stations. They were more like machines built into the fabric of reality. And they weren't new. He pulled up a holographic display that showed the Krell scientists' analysis. Data streams and equations filled the air above the podium, but Thex focused on one particular readout. Our scientists analyzed the residual energy signatures from those structures. The quantum decay patterns, the dimensional stress marks, all of it. Based on that analysis, those defenses have been sitting there for at least 200 years. Maybe longer. They've been dormant the entire time. Hidden. Waiting. A murmur ran through the council chamber. 200 years. That meant the humans had built these things almost immediately after making first contact with other spacefaring species. Before most of the galaxy even knew humans existed, they were already preparing for war. Counselor Hemlock, an elderly diplomat from the Orion cluster, leaned forward in his seat. He had been negotiating treaties since before Thex was born. How is that possible? 200 years ago, humans were barely capable of faster-than-light travel. They had primitive weapons, basic shields. How could they build something this advanced? Thex shook his head slowly. We don't know. Our intelligence completely missed it. Every other species' intelligence missed it too. The humans built these defenses in secret, folded them into dimensional space where no sensors could detect them, and then just waited. For 2 centuries, those structures sat there dormant. They never activated them. Never even hinted they existed. Until we crossed the line. Another counselor, this one from the Vertex Collective, raised a tentacle to speak. But surely there was some indication. Some hint of construction. You can't build moon-sized structures without someone noticing. Apparently you can, Thex replied. Or the humans found a way to do it where no one was looking. Remember, 200 years ago, most species considered humans to be insignificant. A minor species from a backwater planet. Nobody was paying close attention to what they were doing in their own solar system. Counselor Vree spoke again. Captain Thex, I need you to clarify something for the record. During this entire incident, did the humans attempt to negotiate? Did they offer terms for your withdrawal? Did they give any opportunity for a peaceful resolution? The question hung in the air. Thex took a breath before answering. This was the part that hurt the most, the part that kept him awake at night. Yes, Counselor. They gave us 14 months of warnings. 14 months. They filed diplomatic protests through official channels. They sent envoys to our homeworld to request face-to-face negotiations. They offered to settle the matter through the Galactic Court. They asked us repeatedly to stop raiding their colonies. And your government's response? We ignored them. We interpreted their restraint as weakness. They kept talking instead of fighting, so we assumed they couldn't fight. That they were too weak to defend themselves. Thex paused, his voice dropping. We were wrong. They weren't being weak. They were being merciful. They were giving us a choice. The weight of that statement settled over the chamber. The humans had shown mercy. They had given warning after warning. They had tried every peaceful option available. And the Krell had mistaken that patience for cowardice. An older counselor from the rear of the chamber stood up. What is the current status of the human defensive line? Thex pulled up a new display showing the red boundary line still marked in space around the human solar system. The line remains exactly where it was. No human ships patrol it. No visible defenses. No warning beacons or automated messages. Just empty space. Then how do you know the defenses are still active? Because our long-range sensors can still detect the dimensional stress markers. The structures are still there, folded back into whatever impossible space they hide in. Waiting. If another ship crosses that line, the same thing will happen. Those defenses will unfold and that ship will die. Counselor Vree stood up slowly, his ancient joints creaking. So the humans have created a perfect defense. One that requires no maintenance, no patrol ships, no active monitoring. Just a line in space and the promise of certain death for anyone who crosses it. Yes, Counselor. And there's no way to counter it? No way to disable these structures. Thex almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Counselor, we barely understand what they are, let alone how to fight them. They exist in dimensions our physics can barely describe. They manipulate time and space and matter in ways that violate every natural law we know. To counter them, we'd need to develop entirely new branches of science. It would take decades, maybe centuries. Another long silence filled the chamber. Finally, Vree spoke again. Then I move that we formally update the Galactic Navigation Database. The human boundary line should be marked as a Priority 1 exclusion zone. No vessel from any member species should cross it under any circumstances. The motion passed unanimously. Not a single counselor voted against it. As the meeting broke up and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Thex remained at the podium, staring at the holographic display of the red line. Somewhere out there, in the darkness of space, those structures were still waiting. Patient. Silent. Ready to kill anyone stupid enough to test them again. The humans had given the galaxy a choice. Respect the line or die. Most species, Thex thought, would probably choose to respect it. 6 months after the incident, something changed across the entire galaxy. Every major power, from the Valon Union to the Vertex Collective to the distant Orion Federation, quietly updated their navigation databases. The change was subtle but absolute. The red line around human space, once just marked as a boundary or territorial limit, now carried a new designation in every star chart, every navigation computer, every fleet database across known space. Exclusion zone, do not cross. Not a warning. Not a suggestion. An absolute prohibition. Ship captains who plotted courses anywhere near that line received automatic alerts telling them to recalculate. Trading companies removed it from their route maps entirely. Even pirates and smugglers, people who made their living by ignoring laws and boundaries, gave that section of space a wide berth. The humans, for their part, sent one final transmission to the Galactic Council. It was brief. No long speech. No diplomatic language. Just a simple statement of fact. Director James Mitchell appeared on screen again, the same man who had delivered the original warning 6 months earlier. He still wore that plain dark suit. His expression still showed nothing. No satisfaction at being proven right. No anger at what had happened. Nothing. Just the same tired, flat look of someone doing a job that needed doing. The boundary stands, Mitchell said. You know where it is. The coordinates were transmitted 6 months ago and have not changed. What happens if you cross it is not our responsibility. It's yours. We will not warn you again. We won't need to. The transmission lasted 15 seconds. Then it ended. The humans didn't elaborate. Didn't explain. Didn't threaten. They had said everything that needed saying and now they were done talking. Life went back to normal mostly. Trade continued. Diplomatic relations resumed. The galaxy moved on. But that red line stayed there, marked on every chart, and everyone remembered what happened to the Krell fleet that had crossed it. In a military academy on the Krell homeworld, a new course was added to the curriculum. Every officer candidate, regardless of their specialty or intended career path, had to sit through it. The course was called First Contact Protocols and Boundary Respect. Really though, everyone just called it the Human Lecture. The classroom was packed with young cadets, maybe 50 of them, all wearing crisp new uniforms. At the front of the room stood their instructor, Captain Thex, retired now. His career had ended the day his ship limped back across the human boundary line. The Krell military didn't court-martial him. They didn't blame him for following orders. But they also didn't let him command another ship. Instead they made him teach. Thex stood at the podium and pulled up a display showing the sensor logs from that day. Real footage. Unedited. The cadets watched in silence as the Vanguard ships crossed the red line. They watched the structures unfold from impossible dimensions. They watched ships age and crumble and simply cease to exist. When the footage ended, the classroom was dead quiet. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They just stared at the frozen image on the screen showing the red line and the empty space where almost 200 Krell warships used to be. Finally, a young cadet in the third row raised her hand. She was fresh-faced, barely old enough to be here, probably straight out of high school. "Sir," she said, her voice uncertain, "what's actually beyond the line? I mean, if we scanned past it with long-range sensors, what would we find?" Thex looked at her for a long moment. It was a good question. An important one. "Nothing unusual," he said. "Empty space. Human colonies going about their business. Their merchant ships traveling between planets. Mining operations in asteroid belts. Research stations studying stars and planets. Completely ordinary activity. If you pointed a telescope past that line, you'd see humans living their lives just like any other species." The cadet frowned, confused. "Then why the exclusion zone? If it's just normal space?" "Because," Thex interrupted gently, "the moment you cross that threshold, you stop finding normal space. You find what the humans built into it. What they hid there. What they've been patient enough to never have to use until someone forces their hand." Another cadet, this one sitting near the back, spoke up. "But sir, that was 6 months ago. Our scientists have been studying the sensor data. They're developing countermeasures. New shield technology that might protect against the temporal distortions. New hull materials that resist dimensional stress. If we develop technology to bypass those defenses..." Thex held up a hand, cutting him off. "Then you'd better hope you're right. You'd better hope your countermeasures work perfectly the first time. Because humans don't bluff twice. They gave us mercy once. They gave us warnings. They gave us a line. They gave us a choice." His voice dropped, becoming quieter. The cadets had to lean forward to hear him. "We made the wrong choice. I watched 193 ships die. 40,000 crew members. People I knew. People I trained with. People who trusted their commanders to make smart decisions. And they all died because we thought restraint meant weakness. He pulled up a final image. The red line hanging in space. No ships. No structures. Nothing visible at all. Just an invisible boundary that promised death to anyone who crossed it. That line is still there, Thex said. It will always be there. And every species in this galaxy now knows something about humans that we learned the hard way. Earth doesn't need threats. They don't need to constantly remind everyone how dangerous they are. They don't need fleets patrolling their borders or weapons platforms orbiting every approach. They just need you to make one mistake. The young cadet in the third row looked troubled. What mistake, sir? Thex's answer was simple. Just 2 words. But those 2 words carried the weight of 40,000 dead crew members and 193 destroyed ships. Crossing the line. The classroom fell silent again. The cadets stared at the image of that invisible boundary. Some of them were probably thinking about the human defenses, trying to imagine what it would be like to face them. Others were probably thinking about the Krell crews who had died there, torn apart by forces they couldn't understand or fight. But all of them, every single cadet in that room, understood the lesson. The humans had drawn a line. They had warned everyone to respect it. And when someone ignored that warning, the humans had shown exactly what happened to those who thought they knew better. The line was still there. Still waiting. Still silent. And it would stay that way, Thex knew, until the next species decided to test it. He just hoped he wouldn't be around to see it when they did.